Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's build, the aspect of Auriel. This build uses a plethora of light-based weapons and spells to dazzle his foes in carrying out the will of the god Auriel in Skyrim. This build is part of a collaborative project with Dovah Builds. I'll pop a link to his channel in the description box so you can check out his content. So without further ceremony, let's crack on with the video. The aspect of Auriel was a monk, originally belonging to the insular and highly mysterious Psijic order on the Isle of Artaeum. The monastic life was a solitary one, doubly so for the Psijics. They cared a great deal about the goings-on in the world outside their walls. Knowledge was power after all, but they interacted with it very little. The simple life, devoted to the pursuit of knowledge and greater command of spellcraft for its own sake, was one our protagonist relished. As often is the case with mages sequestered away with little else besides each other and spell tomes for company, they become bored, and some power-hungry. The Psijic order was going through something of a transitional phase with regards to its accepted practices and ideology. Necromancy had recently been outlawed by the order. They may have had a high opinion of their own abilities, but tampering with the fundamental building blocks of life was seen as far beyond their remit. That did not stop some, however, so desperate were they to commune with the dead, to uncover secrets lost to the elves. I mentioned this to render our protagonist's following actions more excusable. He was surrounded by mages, most of whom were older than he, committing acts strongly condemned by the order in pursuit of hidden knowledge. Our protagonist surpassed these rebels in his ambition, but he had no desire to commune with the undead. He set his sights far higher. In a grimoire centuries old, it was speculated that the ancient snow elves knew a way of communicating with Auriel, first among the Aedra. It was written that one elf in particular, Vaithur, a former devotee of the god, had tried the ritual and failed, but it was possible that others had succeeded. Our protagonist read these pages over and over with wide eyes, trying not to get ahead of himself. The ritual, which involved a long duration of fasting beforehand, as well as complex spells written in the obscure language of the snow elves. Even this was pure conjecture, written by the author of the grimoire many centuries after the fact. Nevertheless, our protagonist wouldn't have been able to dismiss the matter from his mind if he did not try. Over the course of a month, he deprived himself of food, preparing for what was to come. On the final night of his fast, he began to recite the complex series of incantations, weak though he was from his self-inflicted starvation. He waited with bated breath after he finished. A minute passed, then two, and he was certain that the arduous process of preparation had been for nothing. Then he felt a presence, invisible yet overwhelming. A being started to manifest itself, visible at this point but only semi-corporeal, not wholly tethered to the mortal plane. It was magnificent though. The figure before him looked as though he was the result of the world's best sculptor, combining all of the most striking Ultima features into one being. A jawline so sharp one could cut themselves on it, eyes that seemed to pierce our protagonist's very soul. Our fortunate mage knew then that he had succeeded. With a pronounced stutter and in a voice an octave higher than his norm, our protagonist attempted a garbled apology, mixed with an introduction. The being before him looked amused by the effect he had on the mage. That said, Auriel had not spoken with the mortal in a very long time, and did not intend to start now. He instead communicated far more directly. In the next few moments, our protagonist saw everything he needed to. He saw in his mind's eye the climactic tussle against Lorcan at the close of the Mythic era. He felt Auriel's regret at the creation of Mundus, his sorrow at the fate of his beloved snow elves, and his rage at the one who had betrayed him, and constrained his power. Our protagonist knew, in that instant, what he must do, what he had been commanded to do in words unspoken but no less compelling. Promptly, after the spectre of Auriel had departed, our protagonist started to pack his possessions in a knapsack, some non-perishable food to last him the journey, what little money he had, and a couple of books. He had led a modest existence while at the Order, which rendered packing his life up in a knapsack an awful lot easier. He felt it best not to reveal the full story to his peers. As far as they were concerned, he was travelling abroad for a short while. They did not know it, but they would never see him again. With that, our protagonist set off on his way to Skyrim, with nothing but his sack of possessions and his Psijic robes, which he concealed under a dusty travelling cloak. He resolved to board a ship that was taking some Thalmor agents and soldiers to Skyrim. Before this, he was able to purchase a longbow and some arrows, and started practicing with them as much as he could, loosing arrows repeatedly at a bale of straw he put in his small cabin on the ship. Though his newfound connection with Auriel had rendered his magic stronger, he didn't have much offensive magic at his disposal, so he decided that keeping foes at an arm's length would be a good idea. He was shaky at first, and his technique was poor, but over time, both his form and conditioning started to improve the more he practiced with his bow. Upon arriving in Skyrim, it did not take long for his practice to be put to the test. After disembarking from the docks at Solitude, he rested in the winking skeever for a while. He noticed that the city guard practiced archery on the straw butts on the second level of the city, and after they finished training for the day, he went up to practice there for a few hours every evening, until the darkness obscured the target entirely. He carried out this routine for 3 months before he considered himself competent to handle himself in a fight, though he knew he still had much to improve upon. He paid a carriage to take him to Whiterun. He had heard rumours of a dragon attack near there, and his sixth sense told him it was where he needed to be. About halfway there, though, misfortune struck. Our protagonist was in the back of the carriage, so he heard, rather than saw, an arrow whip through the air and bury itself in the flank of the horse pulling the carriage. With a lurch, the carriage tipped over. Dazed but otherwise unharmed, our protagonist took stock of the situation he found himself in. From the glowing clamour outside, it seemed as though the caravan had been set up by bandits. Trying his best to stay calm, our protagonist protected himself with an alteration spell, which flared emerald against the wooden interior of the caravan. He then drew an arrow from his quiver, knocked it to his bowstring, and waited. Presently, as he had expected, a bandit came round the back of the caravan to check for occupants. Hearing the footsteps, our protagonist drew back the string as he had practiced. The unfortunate bandit rounded the corner and was met with an arrow which passed straight through his throat and continued out the other side. The bandit collapsed to the ground and began to choke. Our protagonist moved quickly, knowing that the bandit's death throes would be heard by others. Heading round to the front of the caravan, he saw 2 other bandits. Upon seeing an archer and guessing the fate of his comrade, one of the bandits made towards the carriage driver as if to strike him down, or at least to use him as a bargaining chip to save his own life. Before he took another step, an arrow pierced his chest, not enough to kill him, though the force of it knocked him onto his back. This gave time for the third to close the distance, and he swung his sword in a powerful overhead strike at our protagonist's head. Savage elation turned to surprise, as the sword had no effect, deflected by the alteration spell, which emitted its faint green glow. This brought the bandit into point-blank range, and he was shot down quickly, as was the second bandit as he tried to regain his feet. The carriage driver was distraught at the arrow lodged in his horse, but our protagonist was able to pull out the arrow and close the wound with a healing spell. With that, they continued on their way to Whiterun. It is at this point that your story as the player begins. You will want to embark on the main quest, and then under the direction of Auriel, ensure that the tyranny of the sun prophecy is never fulfilled, and take up your rightful mantle as the wielder of Auriel's bow. For this build, you're mainly going to be putting points into magic, until you have enough to cast 1 alteration protective spell, oak flesh up to dragon hide depending on how far you progress, and the other spells you'll need during the fight. Your magic regen is going to be aided considerably by the action act perk at the top of the alteration tree, but before then you can use your apprentice standing stone if your magicka is regenerating slower than you would like. After you've reached your highest minimum magicka for your alteration and restoration spells at each level, you can distribute more evenly into health and stamina. Your skills for this build are going to be archery, alteration, restoration, light armour and smithing. Your gear is going to be Auriel's bow, alongside the Ancient Falmer armour set. The aesthetic mod for the armour is the Ancient Falmer armour replacer, and I'll put a link for that in the comments. As far as I'm aware, the circlet is only accessible through console commands, so if you don't play on PC, there isn't much point investing into the custom fit light armour perk. Both Auriel's bow and Ancient Falmer armour can be upgraded once you've unlocked the Elven Smithing perk, and both require a refined moonstone ingot to improve, making them an ideal combination. This build is in essence a fast-moving combat archer who makes use of magic to render them impervious to most physical damage. They are particularly effective against the undead, owing to the Sun-Hallowed arrows, as well as the Sunfire and Vampire's Bane restoration spells. Make use of the slow time shout, combined with the Amulet of Talos, in order to greatly increase your arrow volume in the midst of combat. I'm using some modded spells, which complement this build very well. These are Tharn's Cage and Tumble Magnet, which both serve to keep your enemies at a distance, at which point you can fill them with arrows as though they were a pincushion at your leisure. That's it for this build. One more thing, I have a Discord server, the link for which I'll put in the description if you'd like to check it out. Once again, thanks to Dovah Builds for collaborating with me on this project, it's been great fun. Thank you all for watching, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and see you again with another video.